Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
My dad looked me dead in the eye over a plate of lukewarm ham and said, "This Christmas is just for achievers, Aaron. Maybe skip it next year." He didn't whisper it. He didn't even lean in. He said it loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, like he was handing out some kind of award for most passive-aggressive burn of the season. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, and I blinked once, then twice, like I was trying to clear a fog that had settled over my eyes. That was the moment something in me just shut off, like a light switch. I didn't say a word back. I just smiled, nodded like I didn't care, and in my head, I quietly ended an entire chapter of my life. I'd been paying my brother Kyle's bills for almost 8 years. 8. His mortgage, their minivan payments, groceries when Tessa, his wife, would accidentally send me their Amazon fresh cart. Every Christmas, I paid for their kids' presents and pretended they came from Santa. Every birthday, I covered for forgotten gift cards. Every time the power got shut off, or the water heater died, or the dog needed surgery, it was me, quietly, privately, behind the scenes. No one ever thanked me. They just assumed the universe fixed things. It didn't always start like that. Back when Kyle first lost his job, again, I stepped in out of love, out of that big sister guilt that tells you you're supposed to fix things. Our mom died when we were teenagers, and I basically helped raise him. I've always felt responsible for Kyle, in ways I can't even explain. I make decent money, I'm a marketing director for a medical software company, and I've worked my ass off to get here. No one gave me a handout. I built this life with late nights and panic attacks and bad coffee. And still, year after year, I sent the money because Kyle's kids didn't ask for any of this. Because I believed, maybe naively, that he'd bounce back eventually. But that Christmas dinner, that was the first time I realized my dad thought Kyle was the one who had it all together, that I was the one who never quite measured up. It wasn't just the comment. It was the way Dad laughed with Kyle, leaned in to tell him how proud he was that he was still trying, and how he said nothing to me except that I looked tired. Like trying doesn't cost anything. Like showing up and struggling is more noble than showing up and succeeding. And Kyle? He didn't say a word either. He just smirked and took another bite of stuffing, like the whole thing amused him. That's when I realized they'd built a narrative. One where Kyle was the down-on-his-luck good guy, the family man just needing a break. And I was the cold career woman, the rich aunt who doesn't understand real life. They had no idea. I left that dinner with a plate of leftovers wrapped in foil and a smile so fake it hurt my face. I hugged everyone goodbye, told the kids to be good, and walked straight to my car without looking back. Then I went home, opened my banking app, and canceled every automatic transfer I had set up for Kyle's family. The mortgage support, the grocery account, the emergency fund I'd been feeding for years. Gone. It felt good at first, like letting go of a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying on my shoulders. But it didn't take long before the fallout started. The first text came 2 days later. Tessa. "Hey, Aaron, I think something's wrong with the Wells Fargo thing. The payment didn't go through. No, how are you? No thanks for 8 years of silent support. Just confusion, like the machine was broken." I didn't answer. I watched the bubbles appear, disappear, then reappear. "Aaron, can you check on your end? Rent's due today." Still, I said nothing. I put the phone down and went to make a cup of coffee. And for the first time in a long time, it actually tasted good, like freedom. But by the end of the day, there were 5 missed calls, 1 from Kyle, 3 from Tessa, 1 from our dad. That last one? I didn't even listen to the voicemail. I just stared at the name on the screen and felt something deep in my chest uncoil. You know what the worst part is? They never once asked why. They never paused to think maybe they had done something. It was just panic. As if the ATM ran out of money and now someone had to be blamed. And that's when it hit me. No one ever asked where the money came from, not once in 8 years. They just assumed it came from somewhere. That someone, somewhere, had decided Kyle was worth saving. that someone would always catch him. Well, not anymore. And here's a question for you. If you'd been secretly supporting your sibling's family for nearly a decade, and they never once acknowledged it, never once said thank you, never once offered to pay it back, would you keep going, or would you let the house of cards fall? Because I'll tell you what happens when you stop playing God. People start acting like the world's ended, but sometimes, maybe that's the only way they finally learn. I wish that was the end of it. But it was just the beginning. What came next made me realize how deep the rot went, and how much of it I'd allowed to grow. The thing about cutting someone off quietly is that the silence doesn't last. At first there's confusion, then there's suspicion, and finally there's rage. But there's a tiny, peaceful window right after you pull the plug, when the world is weirdly calm. It's like standing in the eye of a storm. For about 36 hours after I stopped the transfers to Kyle's accounts, there was nothing but digital quiet. No calls, no texts beyond Tessa's first two, and no panicked voicemails yet. I almost let myself believe they might not even notice, like they'd found another safety net or maybe figured things out on their own. But that illusion didn't last long, because people who build their lives on the backs of others never just accept that the ride is over. When the third day hit, it came in waves. Tessa started sending me guilt-laced texts, carefully wrapped in faux politeness. Hey again, I know you're probably super busy. Just wondering if the payment issue's been resolved yet? The bank said we're late now. Then, not trying to be a pain, but we're kind of stuck right now. I had to cancel the grocery order, and the kids are asking about dinner. She was baiting me, waiting for me to break and swoop in like I always had. But this time, I didn't. Instead, I sat on my back porch that night with a glass of wine and just stared out into the dark, thinking about all the ways I'd twisted myself to keep Kyle and his family afloat. I thought about the Christmas when their furnace broke down, and I used my bonus, not my emergency fund, not my leftovers, but my actual hard-earned, hard-fought, end-of-year bonus to replace it. They never even knew where the money came from. Kyle had told the kids that he figured it out, and I let him say it, just like I always did. And that's the part that stung the most. Not the money, not even the lies, but the erasure, the complete invisibility of the role I'd played in their lives. I wasn't Aunt Erin the supporter. I was Aunt Erin the background noise. It wasn't like I was some kind of saint. I didn't do it to be worshipped. But when you give that much of yourself, financially, emotionally, mentally, you start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone could say thank you, just once. But no, not them. They didn't see me. They saw a credit line. Rachel, my daughter, came home from college that weekend. She was home early, actually, and I think she knew something was off. She always had this weird sixth sense about me. We were in the kitchen when she finally asked, casually, "So, is Uncle Kyle okay?" I saw Tessa's Instagram story. She posted something like, "Some people love to see you struggle," with a crying face and a fire emoji. I nearly laughed out loud. Tessa was never subtle. I told Rachel the truth, or at least most of it, that I'd stopped sending money because I didn't feel appreciated anymore, and I was tired of being their invisible savior. Rachel just stood there, holding a mug of tea, and said something that knocked the breath out of me. "I thought they supported you all these years." I blinked. "What?" She nodded slowly. "They always made it sound like you were the one who struggled, like they were helping you stay afloat when Mom died and you were a single parent." I sat down hard at the kitchen table. My own daughter, my blood, had been told a lie so confidently that she never questioned it. That's when I realized just how deep Kyle's story went. They'd rewritten the narrative entirely. In their version, I was the one who always needed help. That way, their dependence didn't look like failure. It looked like payback, as if they'd been carrying me, not the other way around. That revelation wasn't just insulting. It was disorienting. I felt like I'd been shoved out of my own life, replaced by a fictional character who'd needed rescuing from a family that I had, in reality, rescued more times than I could count. The next morning, Kyle finally called. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear whatever version of the truth he'd rehearsed. A minute later, the voicemail came through. His voice was low, almost calm, but there was a bite to it. Hey, look, I don't know what's going on, but Tessa's freaking out. You could have at least given us a heads up instead of just pulling the rug. I mean, come on, Aaron. Family doesn't do that. Family, that word, that one loaded, weaponized word. I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me. Family doesn't do what exactly? Cut off a parasite? Stop being a walking ATM? Family doesn't guilt trip the person who's been holding them up for 8 years? I didn't call him back. I wasn't ready for whatever guilt trip he had lined up next. Later that night, Tessa emailed me a budget spreadsheet. No greeting, no explanation, just a spreadsheet labeled urgent expenses, with color-coded tabs and totals that nearly made me laugh. Rent, groceries, insurance, dance class for the girls, a spa appointment for Tessa. It was all in there. As if this was a business meeting and I was an investor. I didn't reply. What I did do, though, was pull out a dusty box from my bedroom closet. It was full of old bank statements, notes, gift receipts, copies of money transfers, all the documentation of the years I spent keeping their heads above water. I don't know why I kept it all, but that night, I was glad I did. I needed to see it. I needed the proof. Because when people start rewriting your story, you better damn well have the receipts. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, was that this little rebellion of mine wasn't just going to fracture my relationship with Kyle. It was going to blow open a family history that none of us had ever been brave enough to talk about. Not until now. I always knew Kyle had a flair for dramatics, but watching him spin a whole life out of fantasy was something else entirely. What started as a few comments, a couple of stories he twisted to his advantage, had grown into a full-blown family myth. And the part that hit hardest, no one had questioned it, not even Dad. Especially not Dad. It had become clear to me that Kyle hadn't just accepted my help all these years. He'd reframed it entirely, turned it into something noble on his end. And that twisted little revisionist history had found its way into the hearts of the people I'd tried the hardest to protect. It was midweek when I finally picked up one of Kyle's calls, not because I wanted to, but because the silence had started to feel like a trap. When I answered, he launched straight into it, like he'd been rehearsing in the mirror for hours. There was no hello, no pause, just, "Look, Aaron, I don't know what story you've been telling people, but you're making Tessa look like she's been freeloading, and it's starting to cause problems." I didn't speak at first. I let the air hang between us, heavy and awkward. He filled it quickly. "I've been working," he said. "I've been trying, okay? You know how hard it is to get back on your feet after the economy tanked. You think you're the only one who's ever struggled?" And that right there, that was the moment I realized something was fundamentally broken in how Kyle saw the world. It wasn't about help or gratitude or even truth. It was about control, about maintaining an image, about making sure he never looked like the one who needed saving. I stayed calm. I said, "I never told anyone anything, but you might want to ask yourself why they're asking questions now." He got quiet then, just for a beat, long enough that I thought maybe he'd say something real, but instead, he let out this bitter little laugh. "Whatever, you've always been the martyr, Aaron. You want a medal now?" I hung up before I could say something I'd regret, though honestly, I was already past the point of regret. I was somewhere deeper, somewhere sharper, a place where things were unraveling faster than I could track, and the unraveling only picked up speed. That weekend, my cousin Melissa called out of nowhere. We hadn't talked in nearly 2 years. She opened with, "Hey, so I heard you and Kyle are fighting," like it was some juicy bit of gossip she picked up at a PTA meeting. I didn't give her anything. I just said, "We're sorting things out," and let her do most of the talking. That's when I found out Kyle had been floating a new narrative, that I'd gotten rich off some inheritance from our mother, and that's how I'd been buying loyalty ever since. I nearly dropped the phone. There was no inheritance, nothing. Our mother had left us barely enough to cover the funeral costs. I had worked my way through college while juggling 2 jobs and a toddler. I had paid every damn cent of my life through sweat and tears and nights that bled into mornings. Kyle had been living with Dad rent-free, while I juggled daycare and deadlines. And yet, somehow, I had become the villain in his story. Later that night, I pulled out an old photo album. I hadn't looked at it in years. It was the kind of thing you keep tucked away, because it hurts to remember what came before the bitterness. There was a picture of us as kids. Kyle, maybe 9 years old, grinning wide with frosting all over his mouth, and me standing behind him with a party hat and a look that said I was already tired of being the responsible one. Even then, I was the cleaner, the fixer, the quiet backbone holding the whole thing up. And that photo, that moment frozen in time, it reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. When Kyle was 16, he'd gotten caught stealing from our neighbor's garage, power tools of all things. He'd planned to pawn them to take his girlfriend to a concert. Our dad was ready to call the cops on him. He was screaming, red-faced, already dialing when I stepped in. I took the tools, returned them myself, begged the neighbor not to press charges, and told Dad that I'd taken them to help a friend build a treehouse. Dad believed me. Or maybe he just wanted to. Either way, Kyle got away with it. And that was the beginning of the pattern. I covered for him again when he dropped out of community college and didn't tell anyone. I told our dad he was taking online classes. I even paid for his textbooks one semester, just to keep the lie alive. I lied so many times, I started to forget where the truth had ended. And now it was all catching up with me. The final straw came when I saw Tessa's Facebook post. Just a plain black background with white text that read, "Some people will only love you if you need them less than they need you." 100 likes, dozens of comments, cousins, old classmates. Even my aunt chimed in with, "So true, sweetheart. Some people are just toxic." Toxic. That's what I'd become in their minds. It was wild to sit with that realization, that the woman who paid their bills, filled their fridge, and made sure their daughters had birthday cakes and ballet slippers was now toxic. But the worst part of me understood it. Because I'd let the lie grow, I'd fed it with my silence, with every time I picked up the check without asking, every time I played along with the illusion. I had built the very cage I was now trying to escape. And maybe, just maybe, it was already too late to break free without burning it all down. I don't know what it is about families, but somewhere along the line, we all start repeating the stories that are most comfortable, not necessarily the ones that are most true. We cling to them like security blankets, patched together out of excuses, half memories, and deliberate omissions, until we can't even tell the difference between nostalgia and denial. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, you start to lose track of who the villain is. For years, I played my part. I sat quietly at every Christmas and birthday and barbecue, watching Kyle hold court like he was the comeback king, telling his little anecdotes about life's ups and downs, always humble, always the underdog, and everyone clapped along because it felt good to believe that the struggling father of two was just waiting for the right break to come along. It never mattered that the only reason he was still standing was because I had been propping him up with both hands and a bank account that bled a little more every month. But now, after I stopped feeding the illusion, I started to see just how much of our family history had been twisted around Kyle's narrative. It was like someone had taken a pair of scissors to my life and cut out all the inconvenient parts. The work, the stress, the nights I cried in my car outside of Walgreens because I couldn't afford groceries and diapers in the same week, and left behind a version of me that was cold, distant, privileged. And the worst part was, my own father seemed to believe it. Or maybe he just wanted to. I decided to talk to him. I figured it was time. I didn't want another secondhand lecture coming from Kyle or Tessa, wrapped in guilt and fake concern. I wanted to look him in the eye and ask the question that had been clawing at my inside since Christmas. Did he really believe that I was the one who hadn't earned a seat at the table this year? I called ahead because even after all this time, I still gave him that courtesy. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, faded siding, cracked walkway, that same stupid garden gnome that's been leaning sideways since 1998, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, like being 16 again, walking in the door with straight A's and knowing he was going to ask, why I wasn't in the top percentile instead of just saying he was proud. He met me at the door like nothing was wrong. No mention of the comment, no mention of the fallout. He asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. I sat on the old plaid couch in the living room and watched him settle into his recliner. And then I just asked, "Why did you say that, Dad? About achievers? About me not belonging?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even look away. He shrugged like it was nothing and said, "It wasn't personal, just a joke. You've always been sensitive." That word, sensitive, it hit me like a slap. I've heard it all my life. It was his go-to way of minimizing any emotion he didn't want to deal with. It was his favorite way to dismiss me without having to answer for anything. I pushed harder. "I've been paying Kyle's bills for almost a decade by myself," I said. "Rent, food, utilities, school supplies, clothes, you name it. I paid for the furnace 2 winters ago. Did you know that?" He stared at me like I was speaking another language. Then he actually had the nerve to scoff. "Well, that was your choice. No one forced you." And that right there, that was the moment I knew he was never going to see it. Not really, because to him, Kyle was still the one who needed protecting. And I was just the capable one, the strong one, the one who didn't need praise or help or recognition. I was a tool, a solution, a means to someone else's end. "I lied for him," I said, my voice sharper now. "Do you remember when he was arrested for stealing from the neighbor's garage? I made that go away. I told you I did it so you wouldn't send him to juvie. And when he dropped out of college, I made up classes. I told you he was working on something innovative online. I paid for textbooks that never got opened. I've been cleaning up his messes since I was 17, and you've never, not once, asked what that's done to me." He didn't respond right away. He leaned back in his chair like he needed time to absorb it, but I wasn't fooled. He'd had years to absorb it. This wasn't new information. It was just inconvenient. Eventually, he looked at me and said, "You always wanted to be the hero, Aaron. You never let anyone else figure things out on their own." That almost broke me. I sat there stunned, my hands clenched in my lap, and I could feel my face flush with the kind of heat that only comes from being deeply, thoroughly misunderstood. Because I never wanted to be a hero. I just didn't want to watch everything fall apart. I didn't want to see Kyle spiral or see his daughters grow up with the kind of instability that leaves lasting scars. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because I believed that's what family does. But apparently, in our family, silence means guilt and effort means arrogance. When I left, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hug him. I walked out the same way I had walked in, alone, holding back more than I said. And when I got home, Rachel was waiting. She'd found something, old journals, notebooks from when I was in my 20s, pages filled with financial logs, stress rants, late-night musings about whether I was doing the right thing. She sat me down and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me how much you were doing for them?" And all I could say was, "Because I didn't think I was allowed to." Allowed. That's the word that kept echoing. I hadn't been allowed to ask for credit. I hadn't been allowed to resent it. I hadn't been allowed to be tired. I'd been the strong one. And once people decide that's who you are, they never give you permission to be anything else. But something had shifted now. The story Kyle had been telling was falling apart at the seams, and I was done patching it back up. I didn't know what was going to come next, but for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of it. Because if people were going to hate me for stopping the lie, then maybe they never really loved me for telling it in the first place. It didn't take long after that conversation with my father for the dam to finally crack. I think I'd known it was coming, the way you know a storm's building long before the rain actually hits the ground. You feel it in the air, in the sudden stillness, in the weight behind every little thing. When people talk about family collapse, they usually talk about some big dramatic moment, some earth-shattering discovery, or a betrayal so bold it can't be ignored. But the truth is, it's usually a slow, grinding pressure that finally wears everything down. And once it goes, it doesn't go gently. Kyle didn't text again. He called. Every day, sometimes twice. I didn't answer. I watched the screen light up with his name and felt nothing. Not guilt, not sadness, just a kind of tired clarity. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't calling to ask what he could do to make things right. He was calling because the money had stopped. And with it, the narrative he'd carefully curated for everyone around him. And when you take away a man's favorite lie, what you're left with is rage. I picked up on a Thursday afternoon. I remember the exact moment because I was halfway through folding laundry, and I thought, why not? Let's see what he sounds like when the mask finally slips. I didn't even say hello. He didn't waste a second. Jesus Christ, Aaron, you couldn't have given me a heads up? You couldn't have at least warned us before you decided to nuke our lives? I stayed quiet. I wanted him to fill the silence, and he did. Oh, he did. The girls think we're getting evicted. Tessa's not speaking to me. I'm trying to figure out how to pay the car insurance. And I've got creditors calling now. You put us in a hole, and for what? So you could feel powerful? So you could what, finally play victim after years of acting like you were some silent saint? I told him calmly that I didn't owe him anything anymore. That I hadn't for a long time. That maybe if he'd been honest with even one person, his wife, our dad, me, this wouldn't feel like an ambush. He laughed, that bitter, dismissive laugh he always used when he felt cornered. Don't act like you did this out of love. You liked it. You liked being the one in control. You wanted me to be dependent so you could feel better about your life. It was like being slapped without being touched. And it was a weird thing to hear because for a second, just a second, I almost believed him. That's the power of family, especially the dysfunctional kind. They can make you doubt the very ground you're standing on. But then I remembered all the nights I stayed late at work so I could afford to wire them a couple extra $100 for back-to-school clothes. I remembered driving across town in a snowstorm to drop off groceries after Kyle claimed the fridge broke and the kids were crying from hunger. I remembered paying off a medical bill for Tessa when she didn't even have the decency to say thank you. Just a thumbs-up emoji and a Venmo request 2 weeks later for her salon appointment. And I remembered the birthday card his youngest daughter sent last year that said, "Thanks for the present. Daddy said you helped him get it," like I was some weird middleman for Santa Claus. No, I hadn't done it to feel powerful. I'd done it because I was scared that if I didn't, no one else would. I asked him, finally, what would have happened if I stopped 5 years ago? He didn't answer. He knew. We both knew. And then he said something that told me just how deep his resentment ran. You think you're better than everyone else, but you're not. You're just bitter because nobody claps for you. I should have ended the call right there, but I didn't. I leaned into it. I told him that maybe if he had ever once clapped for me, if he had ever once said thank you, if he had ever once offered to pay back even a portion of what I gave, maybe I wouldn't be bitter. Maybe I'd still be helping. And then I said something that surprised even me. You don't want help, you want a sponsor, and I'm done playing that role. He hung up. No goodbye, no rage, just click. I sat there, phone still in hand, the sound of the dial tone buzzing in my ears like a warning siren. And that's when Rachel walked in from class, looked at me, and said, "Mom, his daughter called me today." My stomach dropped. Apparently, Kyle's oldest, Leah, just 12, had gotten hold of Rachel's number from one of Tessa's contacts and called crying. Said her parents were fighting a lot lately, that there was talk about selling the house, that she didn't understand why Aunt Erin didn't love them anymore. And there it was, the punch in the gut I hadn't seen coming. Because no matter how angry I was at Kyle, or how disgusted I felt with Tessa, those girls didn't deserve this. They didn't ask for any of it. And now they were the ones paying the price for their parents' recklessness and my silence. Rachel looked at me and asked, "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell her that I was going to stick to my guns, that I was going to teach them a lesson once and for all. But the truth is, in that moment, I felt like the lesson might cost too much. I wasn't sure anymore who was learning what, or whether any of us were. All I knew was that the boiling point had been reached, and there was no going back to how things were before, not after everything had finally come to the surface. After the phone call with Kyle, And the moment Rachel told me about Leah reaching out, I didn't sleep. Not in the usual tossing and turning, worrying through the night kind of way. I mean, I didn't sleep at all. I laid there with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it held answers, like the cracks in the paint were trying to spell out some kind of instruction manual for how to untangle a family you've accidentally knotted into a mess. I kept going back and forth, questioning every decision I'd made, trying to weigh the damage against the intention, wondering whether the line between helping and enabling had gotten so blurred that I didn't even recognize it anymore. By the time the sun came up, I had already made 3 strong cups of coffee, deleted and rewritten an email to Tessa 5 different times, and walked through every room in my house like I was trying to find an escape hatch from my own guilt. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation and the years of disrespect, it wasn't Kyle or Tessa's faces that haunted me. It was Leah's. That little girl crying to Rachel, thinking I didn't love her anymore, thinking she had somehow fallen out of favor because the grown-ups couldn't get their shit together. That was the part no one talks about when families fall apart. The collateral damage. The way kids absorb the fallout like sponges. The way they start seeing the world through the emotional bruises left by people too proud or too wounded to behave like adults. I wasn't just cutting off a brother. I was cutting through a whole structure that held up other people's realities. And it hit me that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't considered the full cost. I spent most of that morning trying to track down a therapist who worked with families in crisis. Not for me, for the girls. I didn't tell Kyle or Tessa. I just wanted to find someone local, someone good, someone who could talk to Leah and her little sister before this whole thing left a scar that wouldn't heal. I found one. I even offered to cover the first 3 sessions anonymously. I didn't care if they ever knew it was me. I just wanted those girls to have one solid, neutral adult in their life who wouldn't lie to them, who wouldn't twist love into a transaction. But the guilt didn't end there. It kept unfolding in layers I hadn't anticipated. That afternoon, I got a call from my Aunt Marlene, who lives 3 states over and barely knows how to use her phone. She said, "Honey, I heard there's some kind of feud happening. Your cousin showed me something on Facebook. What's going on?" She didn't sound angry. She sounded disappointed. And I realized with a hollow feeling that the family narrative had started spinning far beyond my control. The whispers were growing louder. Aaron is selfish. Aaron is cold. Aaron abandoned the family. It felt absurd, like I was watching my own life from a distance, like someone else was playing the villain in a story I didn't recognize. But the worst part wasn't the misunderstanding. It was the familiar sensation that once again, I wasn't allowed to defend myself without being accused of starting more drama. That somehow, silence made me cruel, and truth made me combative. And just when I thought the emotional weight of it all might finally crush whatever resolve I had left, Rachel sat me down at the kitchen table with her laptop open. "You need to see this," she said. It was a PDF, a scanned version of our dad's updated will, which, for some reason, he had emailed her instead of me. I stared at it for a moment, confused, until I saw the line that made my stomach drop. He'd left the house to Kyle, not jointly, not with stipulations, just Kyle, the house we grew up in, the one I mowed lawns to help maintain, the one I painted one summer while Kyle was finding himself at a music festival, the house I spent countless weekends helping to fix up when Dad's back started going bad. Gone, handed over like a consolation prize for a life poorly lived. I laughed. I laughed so hard I actually scared Rachel, who reached out and touched my arm gently, unsure of what I was going to do next. But the truth was, I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was numb. Because this was the pattern. This was always the pattern. Kyle stumbled and broke things, and I fixed them. And then someone handed him a trophy while I stood in the background cleaning up the confetti. It wasn't new, it was just the final act. Later that night, Tessa called. Her voice sounded different. Less composed, more desperate. She didn't ask about the money. She didn't try to spin a sob story. She just said, Kyle's not doing well. He's drinking more. He's saying things that scare me. The girls are confused and I don't know what to do. I know you hate me right now and I probably deserve that, but he listens to you. Can you please just talk to him? And for a split second, I thought about it. I thought about calling him and trying to reason with him, trying to cut through the noise and the blame and the history. But then I thought about all the times I'd done that before. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd become just to keep the peace. I thought about the way he twisted everything, how he made me out to be the enemy even when I was the only person still holding the rope. So I didn't call. Instead, I sat with Rachel on the couch, both of us wrapped in an old blanket that still smelled like the beach house we used to rent before life got too complicated. I told her everything, every ugly detail I'd kept tucked away, every time I'd lied or sacrificed or swallowed my own needs just to keep the illusion intact. She listened without judgment, without interruption, like she'd been waiting her whole life to finally see me fully. And when I was done, when there was nothing left to say, she said something I'll never forget. Maybe the mistake wasn't helping them. Maybe the mistake was thinking you weren't allowed to stop. And that was it. That was the turning point. Because helping someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It doesn't mean pretending you're okay when you're not. And it sure as hell doesn't mean keeping quiet while someone else writes your story for you. I wasn't going to write Kyle out of my life, but I wasn't going to let him keep holding the pen either. There's a moment that comes after the chaos quiets down, after the last message is left unread, after the final accusation has been tossed across the phone lines like a grenade with no pin left to pull, where you find yourself sitting in the silence and trying to decide whether you feel relief or just a different kind of exhaustion. In my case, it wasn't so much peace as it was numbness. The air felt still, like everything was suspended midair, waiting for a verdict I wasn't ready to give. My phone had stopped ringing, the group texts had gone cold, and the family that used to swarm around Kyle like bees to honey had, for the most part, receded into the shadows, unsure of which side they were supposed to be on now that everything was out in the open. Or maybe it wasn't even about sides anymore. Maybe people just don't like standing too close to the truth when it starts burning. What none of them seemed to grasp, even now, was that I hadn't wanted this to happen. I didn't sit in my house plotting how to dismantle my brother's version of reality. I didn't wake up one morning with a checklist and a grudge. I spent years doing the exact opposite. Holding things together, patching holes, plugging leaks in a boat that everyone else was pretending wasn't sinking. And when I finally stopped bailing water, when I finally put the bucket down, I became the villain, not because I did something wrong, but because I refused to keep doing something that was killing me. But even with that clarity, there was a part of me that knew I needed to see Kyle face to face. Not because I thought it would fix anything, not because I believed he'd apologize or change or even understand, but because something in me needed to mark the end of it, to close the door myself instead of waiting for it to slam shut behind me. So I texted him, just one line. We need to talk, somewhere neutral. He responded 3 hours later with an address and a time, an old diner on the edge of town that we used to go to when we were kids. Back before all of this, when we were just a couple of teenagers scraping quarters together for milkshakes and arguing about who was better at arcade games. When I walked in, he was already sitting in a corner booth, shoulders hunched, a coffee cup gripped in both hands like it might shatter if he let go. He looked older than I remembered. Not just tired, but worn out in a way that made me feel something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not the kind of pity that makes you want to save someone. The kind that comes from realizing just how much someone has lost while they were busy pretending they were fine. We didn't speak at first. I slid into the booth, nodded at the waitress, and wrapped my fingers around the ceramic mug she placed in front of me. The air between us was thick with things neither of us wanted to be the first to say. Finally, Kyle exhaled and said, "You really did it. You really pulled the plug." I stared at him for a long time before answering. You act like I flipped a switch just for the thrill of it. But I didn't cut you off. I stopped saving you. That's different. He nodded slowly, not like he agreed, but like he knew there was no point in arguing. Then after a beat, he said something I never saw coming. Dad knew about the money, about everything. He just never said anything. I blinked. What do you mean he knew? Kyle's gaze didn't waver. He saw the bank statements once when I left them out. He asked me where it came from. I told him you were helping, and he just nodded and walked away. Never brought it up again, but he knew. That single sentence felt like it hollowed me out. All those years I thought I was invisible. All those times I thought I was being ignored, erased, dismissed. Dad knew. And he chose to do nothing. Not a word of thanks. Not a whisper of acknowledgement. Not even a shift in tone. He let me believe I wasn't seen. And worse, he let Kyle keep spinning the lie. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But all I felt was this cold, sharp clarity cutting through me like glass under skin. I'd been holding out for something that was never going to come. And now that I knew that for sure, something in me unclenched. Something let go. You want to blame me, I said. Go ahead. But you don't get to rewrite history anymore. You don't get to say I was trying to control you. I gave you every out. I gave you time, money, patience, and plante. You built your house on that. And now that it's crumbling, you want to scream that I set the fire. But I didn't, Kyle. I just stopped being the foundation. He didn't respond. He just looked down at his coffee, the kind of look that says, someone knows you're right. But they'll never admit it out loud because it would mean taking apart too many things they've built their identity on. After a long pause, he finally asked, so what now? I didn't have an answer, not a clean one anyway. I don't know, I said, but I'm not going to carry it for you anymore. That part's over. We sat there a little longer in silence, and then I stood up, dropped a 20 on the table, and walked out without looking back. Christmas came 2 weeks later. Rachel and I stayed home. We didn't go to Dad's. We didn't make an excuse or send a gift or check in on anyone's plans. We watched movies, ordered Chinese food, and stayed in our pajamas until noon. It was quiet, peaceful in the way that real peace often is. Not flashy, not triumphant, just still. Later that afternoon, I drove past Dad's house. Just once. I parked across the street, engine running, and stared at the windows lit up with warm light. Through the curtains, I could see movement, shapes, shadows, the familiar dance of a family pretending everything was fine. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Because the truth is, I'd already said what needed to be said. I'd done the hard thing. I'd let go. Dad's words from Christmas still echoed in my mind. This year is just for achievers. And maybe it was, but no one told me the price of achieving peace would be so damn high.